I was kneeling in the break room, prying a hardened layer of cinnamon syrup off the inside of the communal mug warmer, when the laughter from the hallway rolled in like a parade I had not been invited to. It was the loud, polished kind of laughter that says, "Look at me, I am winning at spreadsheets." Someone was celebrating. Someone always was. A man's voice cut through it all, bright and smug, carrying just enough confidence to be dangerous. "Team, this is what excellence looks like." That voice belonged to Ross Ketter, my director, 30-something, crisp hair, crisp shirts, crisp opinions, especially about other people's work. He loved excellence the way some people love scented candles, loudly, constantly, and with no interest in how it is made. My name is Camille Rowe. I am 46 years old. For more than a decade, I have been the risk architect at Brindle and Crest Capital, the kind of financial firm that claims stability while quietly stapling chaos to the inside of its blazer. I am not the person they bring on stage. I am the person who makes sure the stage does not collapse. I build the models that keep regulators calm. I tighten the controls that keep fraud from strolling in wearing a tie. I patch the leaks nobody else can see, because I am the one staring at the pipes while everyone else admires the fountain. I do not perform. I prevent. The office thinks prevention is boring. Prevention does not have a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Prevention does not have a trophy. Prevention is the reason nobody is crying in the parking lot. So I do my work, quietly. I show up in sensible shoes and neutral colors. I speak in precise sentences. I do not laugh too hard at jokes that were dead on arrival. And because I am not loud, they treat me like furniture. High quality, expensive furniture, but still something you place in a corner and forget. Around early morning, the elevators open and the daily ritual begins. Ross drifts through the floor like a motivational poster that learned how to walk. He shakes hands. He compliments surface-level productivity. He praises whatever slide deck looks the smoothest, even if it is full of holes you could drive a truck through. I have watched him applaud a quarterly fraud reduction initiative that was literally my control updates with a new name and a brighter font. He once called me dependable, in the same tone people use to describe a toaster. Then he hired Jonah Bell. Jonah was charming in the way a polished shoe is charming, shiny, new, and built for appearances. Jonah was not malicious, not openly. He just had an aggressive relationship with credit. He collected it. He was also Ross's favorite. Ross loved protégés. Protégés made him look like he was growing talent, like he was a careful gardener and not a man with a PowerPoint pointer. One afternoon, sometime later, we sat in a meeting while Jonah presented a fresh framework for flagged transactions. It was my framework, not inspired by, not similar. The same thresholds, the same escalation map, the same cross-account pattern logic I had written at my desk while the rest of the team argued about snack budgets. Jonah clicked to the next slide and said, "I think this could change our world." Ross clapped. People nodded. Someone said, "Brilliant." I watched my own work get praised as if it had crawled out of Jonah's mouth fully formed. I smiled anyway, because I have learned that visible irritation is treated like a personality flaw, especially when it belongs to women who do not flirt with the room. That night, at home, I opened my personal laptop and stared at the folder I kept buried behind a mess of boring names. Tax Docs 2019, receipts, garden plans. Behind those decoys was my real work. A private tool I had been building after hours. An engine that could detect fraud patterns before they could do damage, mapping transaction webs like a detective with a grudge. It was fast, readable, and it did not require a committee meeting to function. I called it Larkspur. Not because it was cute, because it survives in places other things do not. I had built it in silence for years, because I had already learned what happens when you offer brilliance to people who confuse volume for value. When I hinted about it once, Ross gave me his soft, dismissive smile. "Camille, we do not need hobby tech. We need you focused on real work." Real work. like fixing the messes made by the people who got promoted for announcing them. I kept building anyway. I documented everything, every commit, every test, every late night improvement. I paid for my own cloud environments. I kept version logs that could make an intellectual property lawyer weep with joy. I was invisible at work, but I was not careless. Then, one quiet morning, an email landed in my inbox that was not meant for me. Subject line: Row Personal Software Evaluation. The message was short, clinical, and spectacularly arrogant. Reviewed. Not aligned with Brindle and Crest's strategic direction. No claim anticipated. Treat as personal exploration. I read it twice. Then I read it a third time, slowly, like a prayer. They had dismissed me in writing. They had set me free with their own smug little stamp. In the break room, the hallway laughter rose again as Ross praised Jonah for something that smelled suspiciously like my work. I scraped the last of the syrup from the warmer, washed my hands, and dried them carefully. I did not need applause. I needed leverage. And now I had it. After that email, my anger turned into something cleaner, sharper, less emotional, more engineered. I have always preferred my feelings the way I prefer my risk controls: structured, documented, and capable of ruining someone's day. I made two lists. One list held what Brindle and Crest believed about me: dependable, quiet, replaceable, grateful to be included. The other list held what I knew. I was the person keeping their system from face-planting into a regulatory audit with its shoelaces untied. When you hold those two realities side by side, the solution is obvious. You stop asking. You start building an exit so undeniable, it becomes a mirror they cannot avoid. I contacted a boutique firm called Glasswing Analytics. I did not pick them because they had the biggest office or the loudest website. I picked them because their leadership actually published papers on financial crime detection instead of reposting inspirational quotes over stock photos of handshakes. They invited me to a meeting in a modest suite that smelled like coffee and competence. No motivational posters, no neon slogans about hustle, just whiteboards filled with real math and a receptionist who looked up and said my name like it mattered. Three partners sat across from me: Sabrina Cho, precise and watchful; Marcus Dyer, calm and skeptical; Lila Orman, friendly in a way that suggested she could also destroy someone in cross-examination. They asked questions that made my chest loosen, not, "Can it scale?" said in a tone that implies I am a child with finger paint. They asked, "What is your false positive rate across mixed account types?" And, "How do you handle identity obfuscation chains?" And, "What is your escalation timing for high-risk clusters?" So I opened Larkspur and showed them. I used sanitized data, nothing proprietary to Brindle and Crest. Within moments, Larkspur flagged a pattern that looked like ordinary vendor payments until the graph view snapped it into a spiral. Circular transfers masked through micro-invoices, routed through a shell entity with a respectable name. Sabrina leaned forward. Marcus stopped pretending to be unimpressed. Lila smiled like she had just found a new favorite weapon. "You built this alone?" Sabrina asked. "In my spare time," I said. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Why was it not developed in-house?" I kept my tone light. In-house prefers applause over accuracy. Lila laughed once, sharp and delighted. "I understand that language." Then I placed my documentation on the table. Logs, receipts, cloud contracts, screenshots, including the email where Brindle and Crest officially shrugged and called it personal exploration. Lila read it and whistled quietly. "They really put that in writing." "They did," I said. "They are generous when they are dismissive." Glasswing did not ask me to name a number. They asked what I wanted. That question alone told me they were different. I told them the truth. I did not want to sell Larkspur outright. I wanted to license it. I wanted control over its development. I wanted the kind of partnership that respects the person who built the engine, not just the people who planned the billboard. We negotiated. We structured a joint venture under a new entity, Larkspur Sentinel Systems. Not a flashy name, but a sturdy one, like a lock. Glasswing brought capital and sales reach. I retained ownership of the core IP and technical authority. We filed protections. We prepared pilot programs. We positioned it for enterprise compliance environments without turning it into a sluggish committee project. All while I kept showing up at Brindle and Crest like nothing had changed. I kept my routine so steady it could have been mistaken for surrender. I fixed Jonah's misconfigured alerts when his fresh framework started throwing false positives like confetti. I corrected the reporting dashboard that Ross bragged about because it was counting the same risk twice and calling it innovation. Ross thanked Jonah for the team effort. Jonah accepted thanks like it was his natural climate. I smiled, polite and mild. I let them believe I was still the woman in the corner who would keep saving them because I did not know how to do anything else. That is the funny part about being underestimated. People mistake your composure for compliance. Meanwhile, Glasswing was lining up meetings with regional banks and payment processors. Quiet conversations, serious questions, the kind that smell like contracts. We ran a pilot with a mid-sized credit network called Pineborough Exchange. Larkspur detected a siphoning scheme that their legacy system had missed for months. Pineborough did not celebrate with balloons. They sent a sober email that said, "We would like to proceed." That email was worth more than any applause Ross could fake. Soon, we had momentum. Not loud momentum, real momentum. Around the late afternoon on a day that felt ordinary, Brindle and Crest held one of their innovation spotlights. It was an internal event where executives pretended ideas emerged from meetings and not from people doing quiet work while everyone else talked. Ross stood up and announced, "We are committing to proprietary fraud detection systems. No external dependencies, no personal projects." He looked directly at me when he said personal projects, like he was scolding a teenager for doodling. I looked back at him and nodded, calm as a surgeon, because what he did not know, what he could not imagine, was that my personal project already had legal protection, a partnership, and a client pipeline. Brindle and Crest was making a declaration of independence from innovation. I was making my own declaration of independence from them, and I was going to make sure they learned the difference. The reveal did not happen in a dramatic boardroom showdown with thunder outside the windows. Life is rarely that cooperative. My reveal happened at a company gala because corporate arrogance loves a buffet. Brindle and Crest called it the Crestline Honors Night, a grand name for an event where people in stiff clothes pretend to enjoy miniature food while pretending harder to like one another. They booked a downtown venue with too much glass and too little soul. They hired a jazz trio that played like they had been emotionally injured by elevators. I attended because I enjoy watching executives perform. It is like theater, but with worse lighting and more fragile egos. I wore a black dress that did not beg for attention. Simple earrings, hair clean and sharp. The kind of appearance that says I know what I am doing without needing sequins to prove it. Ross was already working the room, holding a drink like it was a microphone. Jonah hovered nearby, soaking up reflected importance. Executives laughed too loudly. Managers nodded too often. People clinked glasses like it was their job. I stood near the edge with a small plate of appetizers and the quiet satisfaction of having already outgrown this place. Ross tapped the microphone and announced a toast. This year belongs to the people who stepped up, embraced the mission, and kept Brindle and Crest ahead of the curve. Ahead of the curve. I nearly choked on a canapé. Then he began listing names. Jonah, of course, for strategic modernization of fraud protocols. A manager from operations, for streamlined escalation workflows. A director from compliance, for improved regulator alignment. All work that either came from my hands or depended on what I had built. Presented with new labels, like a thrifted outfit pretending to be couture. My name did not appear. It never did. A woman from HR drifted over and smiled at me with professional warmth that contained no actual warmth. Camille, you have been so steady this year. Steady. The compliment people use when they cannot say valuable without admitting they ignored you. Thank you, I said. I try to avoid dramatic collapse. She laughed politely, unsure if I was joking. I was. Near the bar, I heard Jonah's voice. Ross really believes we are on the verge of something big. Ross laughed, the sound of a man who loves the echo of his own confidence. We are. We will build our own system and show the market how it is done. I drifted closer, slow and unhurried, like I had all the time in the world. Jonah noticed me and grinned. Camille, still keeping the trains running? Of course, I said. Someone has to keep them from catching fire. Ross gave me that practiced smile, the one that suggests he is being kind by tolerating your presence. Enjoying the night? Immensely, I said. It is fascinating to watch people applaud the shape of a solution without noticing who built it. Jonah blinked. Ross's smile tightened. Well, teamwork. Teamwork is wonderful, I said, especially when it is properly credited. Jonah chuckled as if I had made a harmless joke. You should loosen up, Camille. You always look like you are doing calculus in your head. I am, I said. I am calculating how many people here will pretend they believed in me later. Ross gave a short laugh, the kind meant to dismiss. Camille, you do excellent work, but you are not in the spotlight because you do not seek the spotlight. I lifted my glass slightly. True, I prefer results. There was a pause. A small circle of people had gathered nearby, drawn in by the strange sensation of something honest happening at a corporate event. Jonah leaned closer, still grinning. So tell us, did you ever finish that little side thing you were tinkering with, the hobby software? Ross's eyes flicked to me. He looked amused, like he expected me to admit failure so he could call it a lesson. I smiled, not big, not sweet, just enough to be dangerous. It is not a hobby anymore, I said. Jonah laughed. What is it then? A licensed platform, I said, with a joint venture. Ross's expression shifted, confusion trying to become authority. Camille, what are you talking about? I kept my voice even. Larkspur, the fraud detection engine I built off hours. Brindle and Crest declined interest, so I partnered with Glasswing Analytics. We have pilots running. We have contracts in negotiation. The circle went still. Jonah's grin faltered, like someone had unplugged him. Ross's smile vanished entirely. You developed that while employed here? Yes, I said. Not on company equipment, not on your network, and your legal team already categorized it as personal exploration. Someone near us inhaled sharply. I saw phones tilt discreetly, because gossip is a sport, and this was a championship match. Ross tried to recover. This is inappropriate for tonight. Tonight is built for applause, I said. I am offering information. Jonah's voice cracked slightly. How much is it worth? I took a sip, then set my glass down carefully, like punctuation. The licensing framework values it in the tens of millions, I said. And it goes public soon. Ross stared at me, processing the math of his own mistake. The room did not erupt into cheers. It did something better. It went quiet. Not bored quiet. Not polite quiet. The kind of quiet that happens when people realize they misjudged the entire shape of a person. Ross opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked around and saw the faces. Intrigued, delighted, hungry. He was no longer hosting a gala. He was standing inside a story. And he was not the hero. By the next morning, Brindle and Crest felt like a building where everyone had heard a rumor and was waiting for the confirmation to slap them in the face. People greeted me differently. Not warmly, exactly. More like they were approaching a sleeping animal that might wake up angry. Managers lingered near my desk. Analysts offered extra smiles. Jonah avoided eye contact as if my gaze could audit him. Ross called me into his office not long after early morning. His assistant did not smile. Ross stood when I entered, which told me he was either furious or terrified, often both. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. He folded his arms. "Explain." "I already did," I said. "You just did not believe it in a public room." His jaw tightened. "You built a fraud detection system while you worked here." "I built it on my own time, on my own equipment, with my own resources," I said. "And I documented everything." Ross pointed at a chair, but I stayed standing. Sitting in his office felt like agreeing he was in charge of the conversation. "We need to review this for intellectual property conflicts," he said. "Of course," I said. "Your legal department can start with the email where they waived interest." Ross's eyes narrowed. "What email?" I pulled a folder from my bag and placed it on his desk, neat and heavy. The kind of folder that ends arguments and starts damage control. He opened it and began flipping. Logs, invoices, cloud contracts, development timelines, screenshots. The message stamped with smug finality. No claim anticipated. His face changed as he read, like someone watching a ladder collapse rung by rung. "You did all of this," he said, quieter now. "Yes," I said, "while keeping your systems from embarrassing you." He swallowed, then tried a different tone, softer, managerial. "Camille, why did you not bring this through proper channels?" I tilted my head. "I did mention it. You called it hobby tech and told me to focus on real work." Ross pressed his lips together. "You understand how this looks." "I understand exactly how it looks," I said. "It looks like you dismissed the person who could have solved the problem you announced to the room last night." He exhaled hard. "Are you planning to leave?" "I am planning to choose," I said. "That is different." Ross stared at the folder like it might bite him. "Brindle and Crest needs a license. If this platform is real, we need internal access." I smiled slightly. "Now you need it." He bristled. "That is not what I said." "It is what you meant," I said. "You are not asking because you respect my work. You are asking because you respect the market." Ross leaned forward. "Name your terms." "Gladly," I said. "But you will not like them." He tried to look unimpressed. "Try me." So I did. I told him the licensing fee Brindle and Crest would pay for internal use. Not a revenge number pulled from bitterness, but a clean, market-rate enterprise figure with added consulting costs, support requirements, and a clause requiring public attribution if the platform was referenced in any investor or regulatory materials. "In other words," I said, "if you benefit from my work, you will say my name." Ross's face went rigid. "That is outrageous." "It is precise," I corrected. "Outrageous is 15 years of undercrediting and then expecting gratitude when you realize you missed the bigger prize." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. Because the folder in front of him did not contain opinions. It contained proof. I turned toward the door. "Camille," he said, sharp. "If you do this, you will burn bridges." I looked back at him, calm. "Ross, you did not build a bridge. You built a hallway. You walked past me in it for years." I left him in his office with his own oversight sitting on his desk like a weight. Later, an email from legal arrived, cheerful and carefully phrased, asking for a collaborative discussion. The tone was so polite it nearly qualified as comedy. I replied with my terms attached. Then I did something I had never done at Brindle and Crest. I stopped fixing their messes. When an escalation queue jammed because Jonah misconfigured a rule, I did not swoop in. I let it burn long enough for executives to feel the heat. When Ross's dashboard numbers looked wrong, I did not rewrite the logic behind the scenes. I watched him walk into a meeting and try to explain why his excellence had suddenly become a math problem. It was not sabotage. It was reality, exposed. By late afternoon, Ross sent another message. Shorter now, less swagger. "We will review the proposal. We would like to move quickly." I smiled at my screen. The best revenge is not shouting. It is letting someone discover how dependent they were on your silence. The public announcement did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived with a press release, crisp and devastating, posted by Larkspur Sentinel Systems and distributed through a trade outlet called the Ledger Line Review. The headline was clean, almost polite. Glasswing Analytics partners with risk architect Camille Rowe to launch Larkspur platform. My name in print felt less like victory and more like gravity returning to its rightful place. Brindle and Crest was not mentioned, and that omission was the sharpest sentence in the entire release. Around the early part of the day, the office turned into a museum exhibit titled People Experiencing Regret in Real Time. Conversations stopped when I walked by. Smiles appeared, shaky and late. Compliments arrived like overdue bills. Jonah approached me near the coffee station, holding his mug like a shield. "Camille, I wanted to say congratulations." "Thank you," I said. He shifted his weight. I did not realize." "I know," I said. "That is why it worked." His eyes narrowed slightly, confusion mixing with wounded pride. "Worked?" I took a sip of coffee. "You collected credit like it was a hobby. I built leverage like it was a craft." Jonah flushed, then tried another angle. "Ross says he wants to find a way to make this right." I gave him a level look. "Ross wants to find a way to make this cheaper." Jonah had no response, because truth rarely offers consolation prizes. Later, Ross called a meeting with senior leadership. I was invited. That alone was an insult, because I should have been in those rooms for years. The executives sat around a glossy table, each one wearing the expression of someone who had just discovered their house had been built on an uninspected foundation. Ross introduced me like a guest speaker. "Camille has developed a platform that could be beneficial to our internal risk posture." Beneficial, like a seatbelt. One executive, a woman with sharp eyes and sharper posture, asked, "Why did we not know about this earlier?" Ross started to speak, but I did it for him. "I mentioned it," I said. "It was dismissed as not aligned." I slid a printed copy of the legal email across the table. Not dramatically, just cleanly, like evidence. The executive read it, then looked at Ross. Ross's face went pale in a way that no leadership training can fix. Another executive cleared his throat. "So what do you want, Camille?" I smiled, because that question finally arrived from people who understood the stakes. "I want what any professional wants," I said. "Fair licensing terms, technical autonomy over the platform, and accurate attribution." Ross tried to interrupt. "We can negotiate the attribution piece." I turned to him, slow and steady. "No, Ross, you can accept it." Silence. Then the sharp-eyed executive spoke again. "Camille, send the final terms to our counsel. We will proceed." Ross stared at her like she had betrayed him. In a way, she had. She had betrayed his illusion of control. When the meeting ended, Ross followed me into the hallway. His voice dropped. "You are enjoying this." "I am enjoying the clarity," I said. "You spent years confusing my quiet with weakness." He scoffed. "You could have been a team player." I stopped walking and faced him. "I was the team. You just kept handing the microphone to people who did not write the script." Ross's jaw flexed. "You realize this will change how people see you." "Yes," I said. "That was the point." That week, Brindle and Crest signed the license. They paid. They swallowed the attribution clause. They booked consulting hours that cost more per day than Jonah made per week, which delighted me in a very mature and professional way. Then came the part I had planned for privately, the part that felt like setting down a heavy box after carrying it for too long. I resigned. Not in anger, not with a speech. I handed in a letter, short and neat. I thanked them for the opportunities. I did not thank them for the invisibility, because I am not a liar. On my last walk through the floor, people watched me like I was a myth leaving the building. The same managers who had ignored me now looked like they wanted to apologize, but apologies are inconvenient when they require accountability. Ross stayed in his office. I did not knock. I did not need closure. I had contracts. Outside, the air felt different. Not magical, not cinematic, just lighter. Like I had finally stepped out of a room where I was always expected to make myself smaller. My phone buzzed with a message from Sabrina at Glasswing. Client demo request. Large institution. They specifically asked for you. I smiled, quick and genuine. Revenge is often described as destruction. Mine was construction. I built something they could not steal, could not rewrite, could not pretend came from someone else. They got my product. They did not get my loyalty. And that, in the end, was the sweetest line item on the invoice.